Hi, everybody. Welcome to Track 1 Talk 6. And the topic of this talk is CMMC Insights from C3PAO. And please welcome our speaker, Matt. Over to you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Schiavone. Today I'm going to give you some insights into CMMC, where the program currently sits, some insights into the assessment process, which is brand new, and some lessons learned that we as a C3PO have experienced. So just want to take a minute and level set. C3PAO. This is a certified third-party assessment organization. This is unique to CMMC. We're not talking FedRAMP here, so completely different 3PAO that you might experience in the FedRAMP world. The CMMC initiative here, it's really an initiative to enhance security in the defense industrial base. It's a DoD initiative, and its purpose is to protect federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. This will apply to all DoD contractors, subcontractors, and service providers, both cloud and managed service providers. So in 2017, we were introduced with the Defense Federal Acquisition 7012, and this applies again to all subcontractors, prime contractors, and some service organizations who deal with the CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. This required these companies to comply with NIST 800-171. Later, we would see a requirement that these same organizations had to self-attest to their compliance and then later report their score to the SPURS system. And this was, again, to enhance security, but as you can imagine, what they found was these self-attestations, they weren't necessarily accurate. So in an effort to promote the accountability and security in the industrial base, the DoD is now requiring OSCs to obtain the independent third-party assurance around their NIST 800-171 compliance. The CMMC program is not yet finalized. We are waiting on the final rule codifying CMMC into the DFARS, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, and that again will require CMMC of these contractors pre-award. So they will have to be certified before they can actually receive a DoD contract award. We'll talk about that in a second. But while the rule is being finalized, you know, they are taking assessors through training. They are validating C3PAOs slowly. And they are operationalizing the Joint Surveillance Program, which is taking OSCs, organizations seeking contracts, seeking certification, through a CMMC assessment. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Most of what we're going to be talking about, these insights, come from our experience as a C3PAO. Obviously, we had to go through our own assessment, so we had lessons learned there. Actually taking OSCs again through their mock assessments or getting them submitted to joint surveillance, talking with some C3PAOs, and of course there are forums and communications that are dedicated to C3PAOs, and I wish I could stop saying that word here soon because it's not that easy to say. But these communications aren't privileged, they're not confidential, so I'm not sharing anything I shouldn't be. A little bit about myself. You know, I spent 5 years internal to the DoD myself before becoming a contractor and ultimately finding my way in public accounting as a CPA. Always been involved in the information security world, financial controls, information system, things of that nature. So lately, the past 10 years, I've been focusing heavily on SOC 2, some ISO 27001 as well, but became interested and involved in the CMMC initiative when it was released in 2019, 2020. I do work for Cherry Becker, not too much information here other than know that we are a HITRUST and SOC 2 provider, and the only reason I say that is because it gives us some unique insight into these assessments. Some of these C3PAOs are only dedicated to CMMC, so with our ability to kind of integrate some of these testings, it's a different process, different from what we're used to, as I'll describe later. Excuse me. So again, in particular, I want to give you some updates into the CMMC program and the initiative overall. Secondly, I'll provide some lessons learned, again, both going through our own assessment and what we've seen in the marketplace. So the entire program is waiting on the rule to be finalized, and unfortunately, we are not there yet. We are anticipating the rule will be finalized in Q3 or 4 of 2024 there. No surprise, but again, this will be a pre-award requirement. So we will start to see this clause next fall, maybe even at the end of next summer. If you haven't begun preparing, you should. As we'll talk about when I get to talking about the CAP process here in a second, this isn't entirely an exercise in NIST 171, and it's one of the most common pitfalls we see OSCs coming to us. They think they're NIST 171 compliant. They have the documentation to support that, but there's a little bit more to that. There are specific requirements unique to CMMC that you're going to have to prepare for. So we recommend you engage a C3PAO early on in the process. Not formally engage, but at least start talking to someone, vetting assessors, understanding what they're going to be looking for and how they're going to assess you. It's also important to note that there are strict requirements between consultants and assessors. So consultants can give you assessors are unable to give you any consulting advice. So it's important to have two parties early on in the process. Just a little bit ago, I spoke about the Joint Surveillance Program. This is a program that's set up between DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, and the Cyber AB, who governs the assessors and the C3PAOs. And what this is a program to take OSCs through CMMC assessment sooner before the rule is finalized. There's been about 15 of these assessments completed. However, there's about 70 contractors in queue. They're scheduled throughout the end of the year. And the advantage of getting in early is that your certification will automatically convert to a CMMC certification once the rule is finalized next summer. So you can imagine once the rule is finalized, there's going to be quite a bottleneck of organizations seeking certification so that they can obtain those fall and winter contracts. And there may not be enough assessors to go around and really handle that demand. The other program update that has yet to really evolve is any reciprocity with regards to other certifications. Right now, it looks like you may receive reciprocity if you are FedRAMP moderate certified. However, this isn't yet finalized, and really not sure it's going to go that route because, as you can imagine, FedRAMP is dedicated to, well, it's for cloud service providers. So there's not that many of those. I mean, there's quite a few, but it doesn't really help the defense industrial base that much when we're talking about manufacturers and other companies that aren't cloud-based. So it's possible that it's an option. And also being able to demonstrate that FedRAMP moderate equivalency may help if you are not a cloud service provider. So we'll talk about an option here in a second as well. So looking at the process itself and how there's common pitfalls and what may be unique to other processes, again, it's not just an exercise in NIST 171. And this is really evident in phase 1, where a lot of OSCs are experiencing some pitfalls. So first is proper scoping. We've seen many organizations and ourselves actually fail our first assessment. Remember, we had to be assessed because we weren't properly scoped. Our MSPs had too much control and insight into our environment that we didn't really have sufficient controls around. So what we've learned is that you really need to scope your environment to those systems that process, transmit, or retain the CUI. The smaller, of course, we all know that the better you can limit your scope, the easier lift, the less resources required. But we see a lot of OSCs approaching this holistically. They think their entire organization has to be NIST 171 compliant. It's really only those systems that process, transmit, retain the CUI. So major pitfall in not refining the scope correctly, but then also not documenting it sufficiently. There is a CMMC scoping guidance, and per the scoping guide, you have to categorize all your in-scope assets, CUI asset, specialized asset, security protection asset, contractor risk managed asset, and then out-of-scope assets. When you come to us for an assessment, we expect you hand us your SSP that should contain the asset inventory, or it could reference the asset inventory, but this asset inventory has to have these assets categorized based on the CMMC classification. So we are expecting you to bring us a refined, documented, and clearly labeled asset inventory and scope. With regards to documentation, we're also seeing a lack of the required documentation. There is a assessment program out that you can reference. A lot of the documentation that we would expect we're not receiving. First and foremost, a shared responsibility matrix. And then secondly, a catalog of evidence. I mentioned that we expect you to really be prepared and have your scope refined. We also want to see what evidence you are going to use to support your controls and your control objectives prior to even conducting the assessment. That'll allow us to determine if we feel your evidence is adequate and sufficient to meet the assessment objectives. And then lastly, with regard to phase one, is you really have to have a good handle on your external cloud service providers, your managed service providers. Again, this is where we failed. We didn't have sufficient controls around those providers. And right now is where they're saying that they should be able to demonstrate some level of FedRAMP moderate equivalency. Again, this is tough. And how are they doing this? One option we're seeing is that, again, they're FedRAMP certified. That's easy. Secondly, we are incorporating CMMC or the FedRAMP criteria into their SOC 2 report. A lot of organizations don't know, but you can have SOC 2 plus an additional criteria. So SOC 2 plus HITRUST, SOC 2 plus ISO. We are performing SOC 2 plus CMMC, SOC 2 plus FedRAMP, allowing us to integrate those controls into their SOC 2 report and then provide attestation over their ability to meet both SOC 2 and that additional criteria. This won't result in a certification, but it will allow any external service providers, managed service providers, a body of evidence validated through a third party to demonstrate their FedRAMP moderate equivalency. We're also seeing some OSCs themselves go this route in order to demonstrate their compliance with CMMC in the supply chain even before their CMMC assessment. So moving out of phase one, if everything is in order, we'll move into phase two, conducting the assessment. And I have here know the showstoppers because there are, there are 58 of the 110 NIST 171 controls that are weighted 5 and 3 points. And if you fail any of these, your assessment is immediately over. They are not eligible for POAM. They are not eligible to put on your plan of action and milestones. So when we're going through an assessment, this happens to be one here actually. And if we're assessing you and any one of these A through G fail, you will automatically fail the assessment, have to start over, go back to phase one after you've POAM these items. So, just looking there, if your incident handling capability doesn't include the preparation phase, unfortunately, we fail you. Well, we should. That's what the guidance is telling us as of now. So I mentioned plan of action and milestones, and then you'll see limited deficiency items. Outside of the 3 and 5 point items, there are items that are available for limited deficiency, which means it's probably just an item or it is an item where you just need to go back and clarify something in your SSP or your policy, or it's one minor tweak to your documentation. You have 5 days to then remediate any of these limited deficiency items. If not, they can move to your plan of action and milestones. And in order to do that, you have to achieve a score of 88 out of 110 throughout the entire assessment. So you're scored favorably per assessment objective you're able to meet. And again, if you reach 88, you're able to qualify for POAM, provided you didn't hit any showstoppers. And then you have your limited deficiency items that you can use to work towards that 88 as well. So a little bit different scoring system in the fact that one, if you fail, you're done. I've heard that that's how PCI works. I'm not very familiar with PCI myself. I've, again, focused on the SOC 2 and the ISO world. But know the showstoppers and be prepared. And then lastly is the last phase. You notice I skipped phase 3. It's really just the scoring and submission of the package. But in phase 4, the POAM closeout, if you do put items on POAM, you have 180 days to remediate those items. You do not have to use the same organization that assessed you for phase 1, 2, and 3. You can use a completely different C3PAO. As of now, that is. So make sure if you are an OSC or you are going through your CMMC certification, early on in the process, speak with these assessors, your service providers, make sure that they're going to be available for POAM should you need it. With the bottleneck that could occur in the ecosystem, C3PAOs may be overwhelmed and unable to meet your commitments at the 180-day mark, leaving your POAM items kind of high and dry, in which point you'll fail. I don't see too many C3PAOs doing that. It would just be poor customer service. But it is just worth pointing out that these are two different organizations that can complete the POAM closeout. So I know that was a lot. Try to keep it very high level, but this is all new and we're all learning as we go. So things are subject to change here as we await the final rule. But again, we're going through joint assessment with this current process, and these are some of the lessons that we've learned. So any questions?
So you mentioned in a company that they can't, the assessor can't give design advice from that perspective. Can it be just two different individuals in the same company, or does it have to be two different companies?
It should be two different companies. I would be lying if I said there wasn't some organizations who feel that they have a consulting team, an assessment team. That's not how we interpret the guidance. That's not how many do. It should really be two separate organizations.
Gotcha. So gray area. All right.
I'm sorry?
Gray area? Gray area.
Maybe. But not really. Yeah.
So if you do fail your assessment, what is the waiting period before you can resubmit?
There currently is no waiting period, just as long as your POAM items are cleared. You cannot bring, one thing I meant to mention, sorry, you cannot bring open POAM items into the assessment. So when you come into the assessment, we expect that you're under the impression that you are fully compliant, you have no items to remediate on your POAM. So as soon as you're able to clear those POAM items and be able to demonstrate those controls are effective, you're able to resubmit.
So even if I have one of the showstoppers and I fail that, do you still assess the rest of them so that I can kind of get a complete picture of where I'm at, or do I kind of have to hope for the best on the next one?
We're not supposed to. We're supposed to just kind of stop and you go back and fix it. But I think that's going to be really the assessor's call there. I should say, I'm sorry, I was looking for a better word. We're still waiting for the final guidance. how it's written, and all you need to know is that you're not going to pass. So maybe your assessor will be able to work with you and work through the other items. But again, should you hit one of those showstoppers, as of now, you're done.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Matt. Quick question for you. So if I'm an organization seeking certification, about how long would an assessment take if I were to engage with a C3PAO?
Right now, through joint surveillance, and what we're told the intention is they're taking about 4 to 5 weeks. So it's really, you're notified of the assessment. There's a couple planning meetings, and then you're supposed to schedule 2 weeks of interviews and walkthroughs, and really turn these over within 4 to 6 weeks. Of course, size and scope depending.
Okay, thank you.
So you said something interesting that I didn't know before. The assessment perspective that some people are accepting SOC 2 plus CMMC with that. So they're just accepting any CPA company assessing that you're good with those controls, or any company whatsoever with that?
So for certification, no.
Okay.
It won't result in a certification, but what it is being used for is there are prime contractors who are accepting this is maybe a strong word, but they're permitting this to demonstrate that their subcontractors and other service providers are at least in line. So they're using it as a vendor risk mechanism.
Okay, got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Any more questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned early on that the C3PAOs cannot do any kind of consulting throughout the assessment. What kind of groups or what kind of companies would you seek out, or do you have another organization within Cherry Becker that can do that consulting side?
Yeah, so again, here at Cherry Becker, we don't, we take that hard line. We don't provide consulting and assessing for the same organization. So we would look to partner RPs, RPOs, the consulting arm of the CMMC world, and then anyone who is familiar with the NIST 171 and then aware of the specific CMMC requirements. So it's good, as I mentioned, to have those RPOs and those RPs and the assessors in line themselves, in addition to being, cognizant of the independent rules and just making sure everybody's on the same page, your consultants, and your assessors. All right, well, I'll be around if anyone has any other questions. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Matt.